So good day. So one of the most difficult things that a novice or an architecture student first years normally would be asked to do are floor plans. And if you haven't done any floor plans before or have not studied this, and you are studying this for the first time, it may be very daunting. So we're going to be starting small, and I think the most important thing that to keep in mind first is the basic idea of what a floor plan is for a residential. Now, residentials are the most common project that any architect would probably receive during his or her initial years or in the practice. Hardly anyone would give you like big projects. So most likely you're going to be starting out with small residential buildings or residences in particular or interior architectural services or design in condominiums. If let's say if a condominium is has bare minimum and therefore you're hired to design these or better yet say a residence of a small residence, and of course it's very daunting for you if you don't know what to do and you have no inkling of where to start and how to start this designing of a residence. So what do you do? So what do you do if you're like you have a blank page like this and you need to start designing? In the initial stages of any design would be investigation and research. And of course, if you haven't been doing the research and you have no idea of this, how the process would be, the most obvious thing that you need to do is you need to read from references. The most basic idea of what a house is, the correct way of how to design houses, or the thinking, the philosophy behind this. Because if you just look at built environments or ready-made plans that you see in social media or the internet, and what happened is you just try to mimic whatever the configuration is, and most likely the novice will not know exactly why certain things are arranged in a way. And that is just the danger. You're just mimicking something that you don't understand. And what happens is you're just following what the trend is and without knowing the basic principles. And you end up just copy pasting whatever you see without even thinking of other ideas or other ways of doing it or other configurations that are more efficient. And it becomes unoriginal. It becomes a subdued version of whatever you saw. And it's not original, an original idea, or if you're just mimicking this for a client, and most of the time you will not even consider some of the things that are needed by the client because people, specific clients or people that who are going to hire you, would have a different sort of need that needs to be addressed. So really, it's about knowing also the people that who are in who you're designing for, and what needs to be done is really to understand that client or to understand the people you are designing for. In the early stages, you would be asking a bunch of questions on what sort of things that they do or their hobbies or their workflow, what careers they are in, what their kids are interested in. The parents of the client live with them, or do they have pets? What sort of pets do they have? And of course, the general thing is you have to consider four main things about the needs of any human being, which is, of course, physical is number one. Physical means uh, the right amount of space that is conducive for living, not too tight, not too wide at the same time. There needs to be enough light. There needs to be enough air. There needs to be this level of atmosphere that has no danger, no that has to be less accident prone. The arrangement should also be physically segregated in such a way that the public spaces or open to visitors are segregated from the semi-private and private zones. So the private zones, for example, are the ones that are the bedrooms. So normally visitors are not allowed inside unless they are close friends or close family members. Semi-privates are those areas that are segregated from outside visitors or people you don't really know, like the mailman, for example. They're not supposed to be going into the house. Of course, the semi-private spaces need to be segregated visually from the outside. Of course, there's a lot of things to consider. So that's physical, and then we move on to the mental aspect of the house. Is it conducive enough for people to actually learn? The mental aspect of a house is not considered most of the time. Where can you study? That's one of the things. This aspect is letting you get to encourages learning, encourages reading, for example, to increase the mental capacity of its users. So I'm just listing this down already as I speak. And this mental aspect is really all about encouraging the users to have that opportunity or place for learning. It also is always connected to, say, the physical. Of course, the physical is the space that you create that would encourage the mental aspect to actually thrive in there. Like, for example, there needs to be enough light for reading. There needs to be enough air, or is it cool enough for conducive learning? And then we move on to the third, which is social emotional. So the social emotional is the third one. Social emotional is encouraging. It's the so social emotional is the aspect of is to intensify the relationships between its users. For example, if it should strengthen the relationships between its users, like encouragement of conversations. So one of the key things for conversations is, for example, a dining room needs to be conducive enough, or its configuration to encourage talking, or the plan of the house is to have opportunities to sit down and talk. Or they can play games, video games, to encourage stronger bonds. Private areas to talk between two persons. For example, if they have an argument or something to talk about that is secluded or separated from the other people of the house, and those are just examples. Also, another example is the staircase is wide enough for people to actually sit down and talk. And fourth would be the spiritual. So the spiritual is not exactly religion. It's more of uplifting the spirit. If there's enough air, enough light, say a view that very uplifting, or a view to a garden and to see greenery is one of those things that would uplift a person living in the house. These four are interconnected, so they cannot be just separated. And you always have to keep in mind these four things. If these four are answered, and then you have a very successful living space. Other thing to consider would be the dynamics of a house. So when we talk about a house, normally there is a space called they would what is this common realm? It is mainly like the living room, dining room. These are common areas that the occupiers would have access to pretty much. Other things like the service areas or the kitchen, for example, is one of those areas in this common realm. And normally, if it is a house for a small for a family, so they would have children, and this is their bedroom. This is mainly commonly the bedroom, and of course the master's room. The master's room is connected. So these are the three areas of any house. So of course you have your entrance. This is just a generic segmentation of the spaces. You always consider the lot of any house. But in this case, for our exercise, we're just going to concentrate on the master's room or the master bedroom. So the master's bedroom is when you try to consider spaces, there would, of course, all these the first four that I've just mentioned. In order to understand further, let me just explain to you what we call patterns also. Now, what are patterns according to Christopher Alexander? Now, Christopher Alexander is an architect, philosopher, and the way he explains patterns are this, and this is uh, and of course, this is related to architecture. So the way things are in the physical world, we would have spaces. We would have spaces, all right. So these spaces are the physical manifestation of architecture or interior spaces, either interior or the exterior environment. So these are environmental spaces. You have to also know that interior design, architects, landscape architects, designers of spaces. They are sometimes known as environmental designers in general. So we have spaces. So these are the physical spaces like the roads, for example, or it's physical. When somebody designs a garden, it's also a physical space. It's an environment that is man-made and designed. And then so these spaces should always be based on the activities, in which case he connects these two. So activities must be considered, or the activities of man should be always considered before we design spaces. And in turn, the activities are successful if the spaces are designed very good. So the activities are always the key thing that any architect should consider, as I told you before, that you actually need to interview your clients. You need to know what they need and what they want and what are their activities. What do they do? What is their usual patterns of activities? Henceforth, patterns, please call them. So these patterns of spaces and patterns of activities are interconnected. It should never be separate entities. So activities. So that's the first thing that you actually need to know about designing spaces. Activities. So when we say activities, in this first part of this week's activity, you are going to be designing your own master bedroom. So when I say your own, it is going to be you. It's going to be yourself as the client. So you ought to know what you want and what you want to do in this space. Your needs need to be answered, and you have to answer your passions. So we're going to inject also the first four aspects of any space, which are the physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual. First, list down your activities. It's not just going to be a plain bedroom. So the first thing that we need to, so we just don't want to create, like, say, a bedroom that is, I guess you always see this commonly where you have a window here. This is just a quadrangle room. You would have your bed itself, pillow, and you would have your cabinetry, and it opens like that, and that's it. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't say the personality of the person occupied. It needs to reflect that personality that you have if you're designing for something. In designing something like this is a very typical commercial type of bedroom that doesn't say anything at all. Now, so if we try to test this with the four aspects of the first four, it doesn't really answer much. For example, the physical, a single window, if you have a closed door, wind from the outside would actually just not go in. There's no cross ventilation. Light is coming in one source. In reverse, if say there are two windows, it's better because you would have airflow going in and out. You have natural air. Natural air, of course, is much better than just an air condition. If you have that cross ventilations, cross ventilation, it's really better. And then light, of course, in two sides of the room is much better because you have much more light. It affects the mental, and then it would uplift your spiritual. Now here, what about the social emotional? Something like this, an enclosed space. Normally, if an enclosed bedroom is among siblings, it would tend to actually distance siblings. If this is a shared bedroom instead, the relationship between the siblings would be better. Social emotional aspect is that, it does not support, say, for visitors. You do not have visitors. You cannot, a visitor would not be so much conducive. And also mentally, there are no study spaces. Now you're already limited with this space because there is the cabinet, for example. That's a cabinet. There needs to be like a conducive way of learning, space for learning. Enough light would and enough air would actually encourage that if I place the cabinetry or somewhere there. So the space is not very generic. If the door is like 1 meter, this is going to be 3 by, let's say this is going to be another 3.5. It limits the some of the aspects here. You have a single window, and then you have all this just generic thing. Now, if we which in terms of listing down your activities first as part of, so I'm just going to be listing down a few things. So the way I'm deciding for the activities are these four aspects. Right? We keep in mind the physical, mental, social, emotional, and of course the spiritual. And if you take a look at the what I have already so far, it's this. So it's sleeping is mental. A good sleep would actually be nice for your physical well-being. Of course, not only that, also your mental being would be conducive for sleeping away from noise, away from unwanted light at night. For studying, a quiet space, a conducive space, enough lights, enough wind or enough air. So watching is one of those things like TV watching. If you have a monitor, it should not be placed where the glare of a light coming from the window is. So video games is one of those social aspects. So it's a social aspect. If you have visitors, you have friends to come over and you hang out there, or your siblings, that should be considered. And exercise like yoga and exercise. I don't know what sort of exercise do you have, or do you do push-ups? Do you have yoga? Uh, that needs space as well, and of course, no heavy equipment is considered. And reading and working are the same thing as studying, and very similar. So they're interconnected and what sort of things. So if consider this now you so once you've listed down, of course there you could actually list down a whole lot more of activities for your students. And once you've considered all this, once some of the things that you need to investigate for things that are connected with this are the furniture, like for example sleeping. What's a good bed size? Okay, so if you start with the sleeping, you would always think about what sort of bed. So the normal bed dimension would be zero point 0.9 by something like 2.0 plus minus. And this is normal bed. So it's really very typical type of bed. A bunk bed, for example, has one on top of each other. So that's a very standard style of bed. But if you consider something like a bed which is relatively bigger in size, slightly bigger. Say this is going to be like a 1.5 or 1.6 by 2 meters because that's the regular size of any length. A person is about 1.8 plus minus, and if a person is sleeping, it's the entire length of the person that should be there. So it's much better if this is a bigger, and then you can be much more comfortable in sleeping in this sort of bed than a regular bed if you're the type of person. So this becomes a more luxurious type of scenario if you want to. This is the ideal. So budget is not a thing that we're considering here. You need to investigate this sort of furniture. So you need to kind of consider this. Another thing that you need to consider is, of course, study. What's the best study type? Okay, so what sort of table that you need? Again, another investigation should be the research on what sort of the standard type of, I know, of cables. Like this is going to be what 1.2. It's 1.2 meters or by zero point 0.6 meters normally. That's a very deep type of for your seats. Okay, all of this need to be considered. If 1.2 is enough or not. Watching. Okay, so what are the type of TV that you normally would have? If this is going to be a wall, one of the walls of the room, if the room is 2 meters to 3 meters, a 32-inch TV is more than enough. But if the viewer is farther away and watching that TV, the sort of dimensions of the TV should be more than 40 inches or more. And if it's a larger room, like a living room, a 50-inch or more should be considered. So the physical attributes the physical considerations for the niche of a TV, for example, or say a desk. Again, what sort of desk that you need for the TV to be placed on. And then, of course, your gaming should be also be considered. Is this going to be like a desktop type, or do you have a PC there, or a PlayStation, or a console gaming, and what sort of seating that you want? So here you're hitting two two considerations for with a sofa that is for visitors, and this could be also for the reading. Is it Are you comfortable reading on a sofa or a chair or with table? Depends on you. But again, an investigation of the dimensions of what sort of sofa do you want. Is it for a two-seater, a three-seater, or just one person like you? So you need to consider that. And of course, the adjacent, what sort of space consideration or offset to the next furniture. If they For example, this is going to be like a zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.6 meters here on the front side. So the task for this is really a list of your activities to consider. And the second part would be the furniture investigation or research. After considering all of this, all the research that you've done or the listing of all your activities that you want to do, in your bedroom. Now it's time to actually plan out to create the schematic of this in the proportions schematic.